As we read through the Scriptures, it becomes very obvious that God hates astrology. Now, I'm not talking about astronomy. Even though they both involve the study of the sun, the moon, and the stars, there is a difference. God created the sun, the moon, and the stars. And in Genesis 1, starting in verse 14, we read, it says, "And God said, let there be lights in the firmament, or the expansion of heaven, to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and for years. And let them be for lights in the expansion of the heaven, to give light upon the earth. And it was so. And God made two great lights, the greater light to rule the day, the lesser light to rule the night. And he made the stars also. And God set them in the expansion of the heaven to give light upon the earth, and to rule over the day and over the night, and to divide the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good." Therefore, we see God created the sun, the moon, and the stars for a good purpose, to give light upon the earth, and for the purpose of telling time, and for seasons, days, and years, it says. And that's what astronomy is. It's the study of the solar system, the sun, the moon, and the stars, in their relation to the movements of the earth, for the purpose of telling time. Of course, in these modern times, astronomy has gone much farther than that. Scientists, with their powerful telescopes, are now looking out to what they think is the far reaches of the universe. So there's nothing wrong in the study of the movements of the heavenly bodies for the purpose of telling time. For that is what God ordained them for. God's own calendar is based upon the movement of the moon. However, the study of the sun, moon, and planets and stars in the course of astrology, as opposed to astronomy, is completely different. And God says he hates it, because the study of the heavenly bodies in astrology is for a completely different purpose than that of telling time. It is the study of these heavenly bodies in the belief that they influence individuals in the course of human events. Astrology attempts to predict the future by analyzing the movements of these heavenly bodies. They are similar in name, but very different in purpose. And as we read the Bible, we can see God hates astrology. But why? Let's take a look and see. The word astrology does not appear in the Bible, but the word astrologers does. In Isaiah 47, Isaiah, speaking of God's judgment and vengeance on Babylon in the future, says this, chapter 47, starting in verse 11. And I want to read this from the New English Version. It's worded a little different from the King James, but in my opinion, it makes it a little clearer. In a toning voice, he says, he's toning these people. He says, "Evil shall come upon you, and you will not know how to deal with it or to master it. Disaster shall befall you, and you will not be able to charm it away. All unforeseen ruin shall come suddenly upon you." Speaking of Babylon in the end time. He says, "Go, persist in your spells and your monstrous sorceries. Maybe you can get some help from them. Maybe you will yet inspire awe. But no," God says, "in spite of your many wiles, you are powerless. Let your astrologers, your stargazers, who foretell your future month by month, persist. Let them save you. But look," he says, "they're gone like chaff. The fire burns them up. They cannot even save themselves, much less you. And this is no glowing coal that warms them either, no fire for them to sit by. He's stressing the fact that it's going to burn them up. So much for your magicians with whom you have trafficked all your life. They have stumbled off, each in his own way, and there is no one to save you. So we see the Babylonians believed in astrology. It was a big part of their life. They believed that the movement of the heavenly bodies control their future and their daily living and their daily decisions. And believe it or not, this still goes on today among a huge portion of people, even among some who claim to be Christians. How many times have you had someone ask you what sign you were born under? For they believe whatever sign you were born under, Gemini, Taurus, Aries, Aquarius, Sagittarius, or whatever, somehow that it has an effect on your future and on your life. And again, God hates this. But why? The word astrologers is found 8 times in the book of Daniel in association with magicians, sorcerers, the Chaldeans, wise men, and soothsayers. And sermonette time doesn't allow us to go to all those places and look, but I'll give them to you if you want to jot them down, and you can look at them later. That's in Daniel chapter 1, verse 20. Daniel chapter 2, verses 2 and 10 and 27. Daniel 4, verse 7. And chapter 5 in Daniel, verses 7, 11, and 15. According to archaeologists, the earliest records of astrology came from Mesopotamia, the land between the Tigris and the Euphrates River, where the ancient Babylonians lived. Therefore, we can see the origins of this practice and where it came from. Now, you and I, as true Christians, we all know who's behind it. It is none other than Satan's way to distract humanity from their Creator. It is his attempt to get mankind to worship the creation rather than the Creator. And that's what pagan worship is all about. And given the lack of what we know about the universe today, they didn't have the knowledge that we have today back then. It would have been a simple task, for Satan to bring this about. And even today, it would appear that it's a simple task for him to bring this about among some people, given that so many people still believe in it. These beliefs would probably have come from the observing that the signs in the heavens and the events on earth are sometimes related. For instance, it is evident that the winter season begins about the same time as when the sun begins to set the lowest in the sky. And it takes only one step of this mislogic to conclude that when the sun begins to dip low in the sky, it causes winter to come, which is not really the case, but that would be their logic. Given the lack of scientific thought in the ancient world, it required only one further step of this mislogic to conclude that other movements of the sun, moon, and stars would also affect historical events. And an example of this kind of reasoning is found in a letter that they've dug it up somewhere, found it somewhere over there in the Middle East. But it was a letter found addressed to the Syrian king Esarhaddon. And we see this king, he's mentioned in the Bible. And if you want to read about him, where I'm not going to turn there either, but if you want to read about him, you can read about him in 2 Kings 19:36 and 2 Chronicles 37:21 And he's also mentioned in Isaiah 37:37. But they found this letter written to him, and it says this. It says, if the planet Jupiter is present during an eclipse, it is good for the king, because an important in the court will die in your stead. So, this a close association in Babylonian thought, inspired by Satan, of course, led ancient sky watchers to stress their impact on human affairs. This association can be clearly seen in the script that is used in their written language. The sign used to distinguish a god's name, one of their gods, was the sign of a star. That's what they used. In Samuel 15:23, as God was renouncing King Saul as being king over Israel, he said that rebellion was as sinful as witchcraft and evil as idolatry. So we see God hates astrology, which involves witchcraft and rebellion and idolatry. And we know that Saul, according to 1 Samuel, he did at one time seek guidance from the witch of Endor. But again, why? Well, the Bible's contempt for astrology is most clearly seen in its prohibition of any technique to aid in predicting the future. For in doing so, it assumes that history is governed by the fires of pagan gods as revealed in the movement of the planets, thus assuming that God is not in control. So to practice astrology is to make the statement, the future is controlled by the creation rather than the Creator. And that's why God hates it. It takes people's minds away from the sovereignty of the one true God. Of course, that's exactly what Satan is trying to do and has had a great success at among certain people, is to turn people's minds away from the true God, to worship something besides what they should be worshiping. Therefore, we as true believers should never dabble in astrology, as King Saul did. For to resort to astrology is a denial of the life of faith, by which one trusts God for the outcome of the future, and not our lucky stars.